Welcome back into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. Joey Van Zummeren and Michael Stamps here to recap this past month for Mizzou football and men's basketball. Transfer portal wrapping up. We now have a better idea of what both these teams will look like for the 2025 season. Now we can really enter into the depths of the offseason as we look ahead to next year's team. Michael, how are you doing? And just whatever your thoughts been on this frenzy finally cooling down for both of these sports.
Yeah, it's been a lot. There's definitely a lot to talk about, in maybe a short amount of time. Might take a little while. I don't know. There's definitely a lot to think about. And yeah, like you said, we definitely have a much clearer picture now of where things stand for both teams. I think more on the men's basketball side, there was definitely some, levels of uncertainty with where the roster stood, and maybe that level of uncertainty is still there. I don't think the last couple editions have made people any more or less excited. But it's a fascinating roster construction and process that Dennis Gates has undergone. I'm sure we'll talk about it here in a second, but it's rare now to see a coach in this era with the transfer portal and NIL and all of that's beat over everyone's head every single day, that you have a team in the SEC who is relying on player development and retention. So it's certainly a way to go. I think a lot of Missouri fans were probably used to a heavy dose of the transfer portal on the men's basketball side, and how well Eli Drinkwitz does on the football side of things probably carries over to the basketball side. There's an expectation there. I'd like to think so. I think there are definitely going to be some people who are underwhelmed with how this men's basketball class has turned out. So, like I said, we'll talk about that here in a second, and then on football. I mean, I'm pretty excited about this roster. I think it's a lot of fun. So many fun pieces. Somewhere, there's talent, but I don't know exactly where they fit. So it's going to be exciting to watch all that unfold. I guess we're not going to watch anything right now. We have a little while before we get to see anything, but still, to talk about it and kind of predict and see where things are going to go, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll talk about kind of the reaction to this basketball transfer portal as well, but I would advise Mizzou fans against really feeling so insular and only looking at this basketball team and at what Mizzou is doing in the portal, because I think you can get lost in that. And there was somebody I saw specifically in our comments saying, man, it's not a good sign on how many players this team is losing. And then the coaching staff loss is compiled on top of that. And it's like, well, I think every fan base loses in the offseason the fact that this is happening to everybody. If you're going to be upset about the loss of Williams Winery, then on the flip side of that, you like, I'm not going to say you can't be excited about Damon Wilson, but you have to understand that just because Williams Winery isn't leaving the program, to me personally, it doesn't say anything terrible about his character, in the same way it doesn't say anything terrible about Damon Wilson's character or his play for leaving Georgia. So we'll get into all of that later on in this episode, but let's start off with just the additions this football team has made in the spring transfer portal. We haven't done an episode for any of these additions here. So they started off with Gavin Hoffman, a tight end coming over from Iowa. This was one of those players that entered the portal, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly that Missouri was going to be the school. He had a lot of Power 4 interest. Missouri was the only one he took a visit to, and then just only a few days after he took that visit, he ended up committing to Missouri. He does have strong ties there. Missouri recruited him out of high school. He's from the Kansas City area. He's related to Sophie Cunningham, so there was a lot that was building toward this. And I mean, his build, his athleticism is really impressive, and it's just one of those where obviously you have to consider the budgeting into this, but I feel like, yes, it makes sense why they're adding a tight end. We talked after the winter portal, Michael, where tight end was a position where you could see, yeah, it would make sense if they added another one there. They don't necessarily need it, but it would make sense. But I think really the addition of Hoffman is one that they had personal ties to, and that it's like, man, this guy is really good. We'll figure out where he fits in later. Is that kind of what you're thinking about this edition, Michael?
Yeah, and it's actually funny that you bring that up, and I think my thought process and opinion has actually changed a little bit, um, because I do think things were building up to, Jude James taking an elevated role in the offense. He's obviously more of a dynamic pass catcher, and he's, again, a little smaller. We've talked about that a whole bunch, but really get with the ball in his hands and things like that. And also, adding Gavin Hoffman, and I know he's young, so that's kind of the big part of this is he's on the younger side of things, obviously. So guys like Vince Brown, who I believe only has 1 year of eligibility remaining. I mean, you may be put into question what his role is now, but at the end of the day, he's a 1 year guy that obviously Brett Norfleet, we're starting to talk about him heading to the NFL potentially after this season, but at the very minimum over the next 2 seasons where Hoffman could still get involved. So I mean, it does make it a little bit muddier, a little more muddier than what it was before. But at the end of the day, talent is talent, like you said. So again, I feel like we've talked a lot about Jude James over the last season as a guy who could potentially take a step up over this coming season or the one after that. So that's like the only thing that really comes to mind with a potential issue with adding Hoffman. But again, talent is talent, and uh, you're not going to say no to a guy who wants to play for you, which is kind of how that sounds with how fast things moved with Hoffman and Mizzou. So again, talent's talent. You're not going to say no, but it does make things a little, less clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jude James is the big one into this equation because after the spring that he had, especially, they really trusted him with the opportunities they were giving him. It seemed like after Norfleet that Jude James was going to be their top receiving tight end. Um, and I still think there's that possibility for Jude James. Eli Drinkwitz really was a fan of the growth he had over the spring as well. Played mostly on special teams last year. And so I definitely think he still factors into the equation. Um, Jordan Harris, though, has solidified that place for himself as, I mean, tight end two. I mean, I think there's a whole rant I could go on how Madden and fantasy football has created this idea that there has to be a sequential order for tight end and wide receiver. But tight end two, the tight end that's going to be receiving the second most snaps is probably Jordan Harris. But that's because he's offering really good ability as blocker. But then you have Brett Norfleet. Um, Again, really great blocker, really great wide receiver as well. And then you have Gavin Hoffman and Jude James, who kind of fit into the similar skill set of where they came into college needing to add on some more weight, more size to be able to block. And it was just kind of like, hey, he has the frame to put on weight to be a tight end, but he's a really good receiver. And so Hoffman is a little bit, well, quite a bit bigger than Jude James. And it's just going to come down to, which one of those guys develops their blocking ability. Because if you're able, the more diverse your skill set can be as a tight end, the more opportunities you're going to get on the field. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I mean, Hoffman was a 4-star prospect out of high school, went to Iowa. And if you're a tight end going to Iowa, not as a walk-on, I think that says gives you a certain amount of credentials. So overall, again, his athleticism is just insane. I wanted to hit on that. 6'5", 245 is what he posted that he weighed in at Iowa. He also said he had a 40.8 vertical, and when he worked out for Mizzou as a high school prospect, he ran a 4.5640. This was when he was around 15 pounds lighter, but that's still really impressive stuff from a tight end. So I'm just excited to see him hit the field. The next day after adding Hoffman, they got another Kansas City suburb product in Xavier Lloyd, a wide receiver coming over from Illinois State, formerly at Kansas State, had a really productive year with Illinois State this past season. And this was, again, we highlighted wide receiver as a position where they might look to add of, it's not necessarily a need, but it would be nice to have another one, especially losing Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper in there as well. Of just like, who's the veteran in this room besides Kevin Coleman? Who's the adult in this room? And obviously, Kevin Coleman has been productive all 3 years of his collegiate career. And I have no doubt that Marquise Johnson, Joshua Manning, and Daniel Blood are going to develop into the products that we've expected they've been able to for all of this past year. But you add a little bit of insurance, you add a little bit of experience. I think the good thing about those three rising juniors is just the fact that even if they don't have a ton of experience actually on the field, they do have experience and time in Kirby Moore's system. Uh, that's all they've known in college. All they've known is wide receivers coach Jacob Peeler. He recruited them, all of them. So that's definitely rare to find and certainly important in wide receivers. So, I mean, Michael, what are your thoughts on the addition of Lloyd?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Again, just a veteran presence. Seems like he was pretty well respected, in his short time at Kansas State. So obviously wasn't the most productive by at all by any means, but seems like he garnered a good amount of respect there as someone who would have contributed eventually if he didn't leave, and he obviously takes a step down and now is back up. So like you said, it's just more experience. I don't think there is obviously you look at Joshua Manning and Marquise Johnson as the guys who are going to step up either with or behind Kevin Coleman, but I wouldn't go as far to say that that's for sure cut and clear. So maybe another experienced guy can slither his way in there and make a role for himself. But yeah, I mean it's just one of those position groups that it seems like we should know what's going to happen, but it seems like there could also be a sense of unpredictability, and that's where a guy like Lloyd could come in and kind of carve himself a role out. But I like his size, 6'2", 195. So I think he's going to be a good player, and again, the experience, having someone who knows how to go out and catch passes and score touchdowns can never hurt. So again, experience is going to be valuable, especially when you have younger guys in the room too. You have plenty of freshmen who are potentially looking to contribute with guys like Alec Bode and James Madison who redshirted. So, I mean, that doesn't hurt as well, having a guy who has experience to not only use that experience on the field but mentor players as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lloyd, he reminds me, I want to compare him to Theo Weiss at all, and I don't think he's going to play a similar role to Theo Weiss. But at least from what he did at Illinois State, he was used quite a bit as a deep threat um, there in that conference. And it was mostly the reason I draw the comparison to Theo Weiss was just because the way he's beating corners is not with top notch speed, but it's with his route tree and it's just with his anticipation. So interested to see kind of how they get him involved in this Missouri offense, because you'd think Marquise Johnson is kind of that top deep threat. And then next up, Jalen Early coming over from Florida State. I'll let you give the rundown on Jalen, Michael.
Yeah, I think. I mean, opinions aside, my opinion, I think this is probably the most exciting one and guy who could make the quickest immediate impact with his time at right guard and right tackle. For Florida State, former 4-star recruit that played 117 snaps at right guard last year and 177 snaps at right tackle. So obviously one of those positions has themselves carved out, but right guard is maybe the biggest, potential glaring need outside of left tackle. So I think this is a perfect addition. I like his size. Again, common theme, obviously 4-star recruit. You could kind of translate that to having some high level of athleticism. I think this is going to be a guy that can contend for the starting right guard spot alongside Dominic Giudice. So again, has some experience at multiple positions. He also played a couple snaps at left tackle too. So I don't know where he's going to be considered or where they're going to want him, but if he isn't a starter right away, he could definitely be a sort of plug and play rotational guy that we've seen Missouri have over the last couple of years, which I think they're going to find some value with that as well. But he started some time with Florida State, 6'4", 297. So good size, good athleticism, and is going to be able to play multiple positions. So like I said, at the very least, if he's not starting right away I would guess right guard would be the spot he would contend for immediately. But if he's not going to win a starting spot, he's going to be able to play multiple positions or back up whoever would start at right guard right away.
Yeah, it really seems like on the roster, besides Early, they don't have a lot of versatility on the offensive line, and they don't really like just trying guys out at certain positions just for the point of trying guys out. They do like to kind of keep them set at one position, teach them one position first, and then maybe get them involved elsewhere if there's a need. But versatility along the offensive line for plug and play guys is really important. I think, like you said, he'll compete with Jaitis at that starting right guard spot. Obviously, how Connor Tolson, when he recovers, that plays a role in it. I think I asked like 3 or 4 different people during spring practices, like, hey, like, is there any concern at all that Tolson won't be ready for week 1? And kind of got, not too revealing of answers. So we'll see with that. But with both Jaitis and Early, they have some versatile pieces there that gives them a little bit more insurance, especially after losing Mitchell Walters, who has been their rotational guy over the last few seasons. And then also, I mean, Johnny Williams seems to be a guy they like at swing tackle as well. Finally, they add Braylon Henderson. This is their latest addition. We'll see. They could add another guy, but I wouldn't be surprised if Henderson is the end of it. He's a defense tackle coming over from Ohio, and this is just really the ultimate: add some depth, add some insurance. They went as far as 6 defensive tackles deep last year. At some point, the only guy they lose out of that rotation is Christian Williams. And they add Jason Dowell into the mix as well, a 3-star freshman. So overall, I mean, I think that group was good, and now it's good with some even more depth. Anything else to add there, Michael?
I mean, again, you look past Chris McClellan and Sterling Webb, and there are guys. It's like similar to the wide receiver argument I just made, like Marquise Gracial and Jalen Marshall. Those guys like look like they can contend to have a spot, or they should be contending, right, to back up Webb and McClellan. But having an experienced guy never ever hurts. I think he's probably a little bit smaller than some of the other guys, right? 6'2", 280. So little pretty athletic guy, but like you said, it's not necessarily a needle mover, but it's depth and experience, which again you just can't go wrong with. And at the very least, it's going to be a guy that comes in and minimizes mistakes and gets a couple tackles a game. So, like you said, staying good in that position room, and I don't think anything's getting worse by any means.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like he's taking playing time away from anybody that really needs it. I mean, Jalen Marshall, Marquise Graciel, I feel like if anything, I mean, they talked about with Jalen Marshall. I don't want to speculate on how the coaching staff feels about him, but Drinkwitz had said about Jalen Marshall, they wanted to see Jalen Marshall show that he wanted it every day. And so maybe those 2 younger guys need a little bit more competition in that room to push them.
Yeah, I would add too, like those guys have been competing for spots for a little while, so maybe lighting a fire under them a little bit, bringing in someone who's going to play the same position as them, who's older and has proven himself. Maybe that will, give them a little bit of a spark, because Gracial and Marshall, like I said, have been competing for at least a season apiece, maybe even more now. So you'd think that maybe adding another guy would be a bit of a motivator, similar to what you just said.
Yeah, and as far as the insurance stuff with Graciel specifically, Al Davis, not the legendary head coach. I did not speak to him about Marquise Graciel, but the Missouri defensive line coach did say in the spring that they were trying to get Graciel to really focus on his weight and turning that more into muscle, and cutting down a little bit to make him so he could be more of a 3-down guy and not just a run stuffer. I thought he showed some solid stuff as a pass rusher last year, but I mean, mostly with how wide he is, obviously the main use for him is going to be as a run stuffer. So if he doesn't end up developing like they expect him to be a little bit more of an athlete that can rush the passer more, then boom, you got Braylon Henderson in there where you have no doubts that he can do that. To wrap it up with football, they lose 2 depth guys to the transfer portal. Eddie Kelly Jr., edge rusher, transferring to West Virginia. This was something that there was kind of rumors about building up before it happened. And then Talon Chandler, an offensive lineman, transferring to Northwestern. With both those guys, I mean, Chandler, we talked about, he was definitely in the running for next year, at least, to be in the starting conversation. Um, so unfortunate to lose him, but again, it's just kind of the game you play. Eddie Kelly, I mean, again, they have depth there at edge, and it's eventually somebody. It made sense for both him and Jukai to leave. I mean, eventually one of those guys was going to leave that edge room. And then finally with football, to wrap up our talk on the transfer portal, because I do think we enter an interesting preseason for Mizzou football and all the talk that's going to be created about them. FanDuel has Mizzou's win total set at 7.5 for the over under for this upcoming season. I saw a CBS Sports article on this, or it was 247 Sports actually reacting to this, saying they expect to slide because, like, there's just a lot of questions and they don't have a lot of continuity. Um, and I think the thing for me is like I think this is an exciting preseason, an exciting season to anticipate if you're a Mizzou football fan, just because of the unknown. Because Bo Beulah, I mean, he's gotten some experience under Drew Eller at Penn State, but I think the the success of this team depends on, again, so many unknowns, and Bo Beulah, he can either, or Sam Horn, either of those two guys. We don't know what the ceiling or the floor really is for them. And so if Beulah goes out there and is a great quarterback, Sam Horn the same, then that changes a lot for this team. There's no reason, as we talked about not too long ago, I forget in what we were talking about this in, but there should be no doubt that this Mizzou defense can be really good, if not elite. And then it just depends on, for the offense, how well all these pieces mesh together. Can Ahmad Hardy translate his production to the SEC? Does Brett Norfleet recover well enough from his injury? How does Gavin Hoffman fit into that equation? Can Kevin Coleman transfer over to replace that role that Luther Burden is leaving behind? Does the offensive line, can they recover after losing 3 starters? So there's valid questions about this team, but again, I think we don't know what the ceiling is for this team. Unlike, I would say, we've kind of known the ceiling for the team in 2024, and they fell a little bit short of that. So I think it's an exciting time. Any thoughts to add there, Michael?
It's so hard to gauge. I don't know. Like, this is a genuine question. I don't know where the 7.5. Like, I wish I knew how they manufactured that. Not because I'm critical, because I'm actually curious. I mean, it seems like somewhat reasonable because if the offense comes out and led by Pabula or whoever starting at quarterback and just isn't good enough, you put the other guy in, then there's a weird quarterback dynamic and quarterback battle, and that could lead to a whole bunch of uncertainty. I think the quarterback and the offensive line go hand in hand, and obviously there's three kind of, or cornerstones, if you want to say, with Trust, Tollison, and Green, who you could kind of rely on. I'll throw Trust in there just because he's already earned a starting spot, that you could kind of rely on, that are supposed to be consistent and should be high quality players, but you still have two positions that maybe we're not so sure about. And if you have a quarterback who's not ready and an offensive line who's not ready and not working together as one unit, then that kind of creates a whole other situation. So, I mean, yeah, Kevin Coleman, we don't, he's been productive, but will it translate? Ahmad Hardy's been productive. I mean, obviously he had an incredible season last year, but it was in the Sun Belt Conference, right? He's taking a step up in competition and is going to be playing against much more physical and consistent tacklers and defenders on a game-to-game basis. So that makes a difference too. Obviously, I mean, he's clearly talented, but the step up in talent is a step up in talent. Is he mature enough? Right? He's only a sophomore, so there are so many questions and unknowns. But like you said, it's part of what makes this exciting. I mean, when's the last time Missouri football headed into a season where, I mean, I guess Brady Cook was technically in multiple quarterback battles, but was he? Um, so it's the first time where it's not a Brady Cook involved quarterback competition, which is probably a little bit scary for some, but it should be exciting because Horn and Pabula are both very, very talented players. So, like you said, it's exciting. Like I said, I wish I knew how they manufacture 7.5 wins because Not that it's good or bad, but just out of curiosity, it seems reasonable. Um, high. There's definitely a high ceiling for this team. I don't know exactly what the floor is, so it'll be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I feel like if everything goes right for this team, if Ahmad Hardy can have another 1,000-yard season, if Kevin Coleman is as productive as he was, then uh, again, like I'm not going to place a number on it. I'm not going to say they're going to make the playoff. But again, if everything goes right for this team, then they definitely have some high potential. But that never happens in sports.
Yeah, I
That's why
mean,
we watch.
yeah, exactly. And I think the SEC, their conference schedule, I mean, it's obviously the same as it was last year, right? So we kind of know what games to keep an eye on and which ones could be, should be on the easier side and which should be, the challenges. I mean, obviously Texas A&M and your Alabama and probably South Carolina are going to be ones that are tough, but uh, tough but winnable. And you flip flop the home and road locations, which is going to be different. But my point being, you're missing out on teams like LSU, Georgia, Florida. Those ones that are Ole Miss is another one. Texas, like a whole bunch of very very good teams that you don't have to play at all. So you got to take advantage of that schedule. And because I don't think Missouri is the only team in the SEC with uncertainty on their roster. So it'll just be about taking advantage of that. But the schedule definitely plays in for, them being able to win more games than maybe they should.
When Missouri finally gets scheduled to play Ole Miss, I will be sad for that. It's surprising that they've evaded each other because they are just such dramatic foils of each other of the rise they've had. Ole Miss has, I I would think you'd argue a little bit more history, but just the rise they've been on the last few years. So we can cross our fingers for that in 2026. On to the other sport with basketball, most recently adding West Virginia guard Jaden Stone. Both football and basketball diving into the West Virginia talent pool in this transfer portal cycles. And then Arizona State center Sean Phillips Jr. coming over. Again, I think both of these moves kind of embody the frustrations from the Mizzou fan base regarding this transfer portal cycle because both those guys at positions where there were more highly ranked prospects that Missouri was allegedly involved with. And then I don't want to say settle because that's disrespectful to these two players. And I don't know if that's true that they necessarily settled, but then they go for a guy after not being able to land prize transfer at the position. They have to go with the guys they get. So before we get into these two players specifically, I did find it interesting. I asked Dennis Gates about building a roster through the transfer portal back at the St. Louis fan event, the Zulu event. And he had an interesting answer when I asked him just how do you manage building a roster when through the transfer portal, when that pool of players is constantly changing, when you go in and say, okay, we have needs at X, Y, and Z, we're going to pursue player B, C, and D at these positions, but then all of a sudden all B, C, D are unavailable, you still have the same needs, then what? You've gone through a week of pursuing all these players. What's your plan there? I thought he had an answer with a little bit of coach speak, but also with some worth to it as well. So here's what he had to say to that.
Well, you have to have an identity, and we know the identity. We want to find guys that really accentuate our core values of friendship, love, accountability, trust, discipline, unselfishness, enthusiasm, and toughness. Every team will always have holes in their armor. We want to make sure those holes are very minimal, and we want to make sure we cover each other's weaknesses. And I think that's the roster that we're building. That's the core group of guys that we retained, because re-recruiting your own guys are very important, like you guys mentioned earlier. The other part of it that we have to understand is player development. Player development is at an all-time high, because once you retain, you have a group of guys that you're able to now share your culture, share your mantra, and they get to pass that to the new guys. And that's what we saw. We saw great leadership in Caleb Grill, Tamar Bates. We saw Ant Robinson as a captain in training take a big jump. Trent Pierce take a big jump. Now the question is Honor Boateng, T.O. Berry, those guys making big jumps. Now you look at Trent Burns. Where will he be at? Unbelievable length, unbelievable size. I'm excited about this group that we have returning, and I'm excited to share that with you guys when we have media day and everything above.
Okay, let's talk about these two additions now. We'll start with Jaden Stone. What can you tell us about him, Michael?
Yeah, definitely a elite scorer of the basketball. He averaged 20.8 points per game on 42% shooting and 31% from three. Fine free throw shooter as well. I've had a lot of people ask me if this is going to be a guy who fills the Marquez Warwick role, and I feel like that's a pretty reasonable comparison. He might actually play more than Marquez Warwick, depending on the development and growth of some other guys. But yeah, he's a great scorer. He definitely has had some injury concern through all of his career. There's been some seasons where he just hasn't played that much basketball, which is a concern. So keeping him healthy is going to be the number one thing. He started his career at Grand Canyon. Played there for 2 seasons, made the move to Detroit Mercy, which is where he kind of got productive. And then after, I guess, 2 seasons ago, the 23-24 season, he wanted to make the move up to Power 5, transfers to West Virginia, doesn't play a game with a upper body injury of some sort. So he didn't play a game at all last season. But again, when he's healthy, certainly a great scorer. He shot 52% from three in the 22-23 season. That was on only 13 games, so sample size is definitely a lot smaller. So was the volume. He was only, I want to say only because 4 threes a game is still, an ample amount of opportunity. But when he upped that to 7.7 attempts per game in the 23-24 season, his percentage dropped 20%. So take that for what it's worth. But he's probably, like I said, going to play a similar role to Marquez Warwick. Just a really good pure scorer. I should mention he's 6'4", 185, so he has the size to get downhill and use his strength. He can score at all 3 levels, which I think most people can now, but still worth mentioning. His shooting ability and his size and athleticism kind of just seem like a good guard fit for a Dennis Gates team. Defensively, he's fine. It's not like he's a out of this world defender. I think he fits the mold again of kind of what Marquez Warwick would do on defense. Not necessarily a minus on that side of the ball, but he's gonna get most of his spotlight on offense. So I don't, again, rotation wise, I don't even want to try to guess what what's gonna look like in general, let alone where Stone fits in. I would imagine we won't know that until like halfway through next season. So we really have to wait and see, but he has the experience. We've been talking about experience this whole episode, but he has the experience. He's done it at a high level for multiple seasons now. So you have to trust that and ride with it at some point, but efficiency and staying healthy are going to be probably the 2 biggest things for Stone in a Missouri uniform.
And then with Sean Phillips coming over from Arizona State, 7 foot, 245. Between Phillips and Josh Gray, Missouri just has an infatuation with centers who started their career at LSU, apparently. But he's Phillips is a productive player. He started in 24 games over the past 2 seasons with Arizona State, 17 minutes this past year here. He has some good size, which they were definitely losing with Josh Gray, and then Peyton Marshall entering the portal as well. Been productive, been consistent. What do you have to say about Phillips?
Yeah, he is, going to play a very similar role to Josh Gray. So I don't know if that's what people are hoping to hear or not. He definitely has a little bit more offensive upside than Josh Gray does. Josh Gray didn't really even look to score the ball at all, which is probably part of that game plan. But Sean Phillips does have some post-up scoring ability, but most of his scoring comes on pick and rolls and rim running, which was an aspect of the Missouri offense that Josh Gray, it was not Josh Gray's responsibility. Obviously, he was setting screens, but very rarely was he a pick and roll threat. Sean Phillips loves to dunk the basketball, which is good for a guy who's 7 foot, 245 pounds, 5 rebounds a game and a block a game. So not a out of this world rebounder or shot blocker, but he's a big size. I would imagine the activity, if we're comparing him to Josh Gray, which again, I think is reasonable, the activity is going to be probably a little bit more on offense than Josh Gray, which should make people happy, but there's no pleasing everyone. But yeah, just a good, solid big man. He has the size to compete in the SEC. He has competed in the SEC, which is probably something that Gates and his staff value. So there's not much to say about him. He's going to be a little more, hopeful and active on offense. I do like the pick and roll ability, and I'm kind of curious / excited to see if that's something that they maybe mix into the offense a little bit more. Ant Robinson and T.O. Barrett are very good passers. Sebastian Mack isn't bad himself. So I'd like to see if maybe that's something they can get involved in, because as a lob threat and as a rim runner off pick and rolls, I think he's very solid. So that's kind of my big thing with Phillips. Maybe can add a little bit of a different dynamic to the Missouri offense.
The big question is just going to be how good is he at lane violations, drawing those. Big Jolfson production there.
I was going to say, I don't think there's anyone as good as Mr. Josh Gray. I'd be surprised if there was, and I'd like to know who that person is.
Well, maybe new coach Steve Wright. Maybe that's his specialty. Steve Wright coming over from Duquesne. I thought that was an efficient transition there. I'm really great in the half court. Steve Wright formerly coached at Cleveland State, or not coached at Cleveland State. He was the video coordinator when Dennis Gates was at Cleveland State, but he has more credentials than just being a video coordinator. In fact, he was the most recent high school coach to produce an NBA draft pick, although it's not like it was a very out of nowhere high school. It was LeBron James's AAU team, I believe. But still, again, he has the credentials to back it up. Former player in Germany at one point. So here's Dennis Gates talking about his friend Steve Wright and adding him to the staff.
I'm excited about Steve Wright. He's a great product. He's an unbelievable coach. He's the last high school coach to have a player drafted in the NBA. Darius Baisley was a first-round draft pick and one of the first high school kids to go through the NIL process. If you do a little bit of homework, he's been at the forefront of that and been right in the middle. His national relationships gives us an advantage recruiting internationally, his playing career. And he's a great coach, great at player development, unbelievable relationships. I'm excited about the addition and what he brings to our program.
Now, the flip side of losing Wright, or adding Wright, rather, is they lost Rob Summers. He became the head coach at Cleveland State. He was a guy that was listed as a candidate pretty early on in that coaching search. And then they also lose C.Y. Young, who went to coach at Miami. C.Y. has ties to the state of Florida. He apparently has always been a admirer of the Miami basketball program, and they're having a coaching transition there. So it's a lateral move. Yes. I think it's a big loss for Missouri recruiting wise, with what they've dipped into the state of Florida before. But ultimately, it's not one where I think, again, for most lateral moves, you'd be concerned, wow, what's so bad at Missouri? It's an SEC school, and you're leaving to go to ACC school. Not comparing the conferences in basketball, but just what's so bad about Missouri? But again, I think it's really the ties that CY has to that state, and the only thing you can do for Missouri and Dennis Gates is go look elsewhere and keep on building. Any thoughts on those coaching staff changes, Michael?
No, I mean, CY brings along Marcus Allen with him. Marcus Allen committed to Miami. That was one of his, 10 offers or so out of college, or out of high school, excuse me. So that kind of made sense. And he's from Miami. So, that kind of all worked out, I'm sure. CY was probably the main guy when it came to that. But yeah, the recruiting ties, losing out on that is unfortunate. I guess we're about to find out how good of a recruiter Steve Wright is. I don't exactly know where he has the recruiting ties, but like I said, I'm sure we'll find out here pretty soon. I mean, it seems like everyone's a good recruiter. Nowadays, it's more just region based. So the Florida pipeline, again, it sucks, but everyone has their own pipeline. So you just have to kind of wait and see and see which direction Steve Wright goes. But I mean, not to again beat this over everyone, but I remember Dennis Gates a while back saying that it's a sign of a good program and head coach if your assistants are moving up and taking head coaching jobs. So maybe this is CY gearing up to take another head coaching job as well. I mean, he was kind of seemed like a right hand man to Dennis Gates, so it kind of makes sense that he would be again. It may be a lateral move, but maybe he's gearing up to take a head coaching job. So I mean, really good for them. It's always nice to see, you know, people taking new jobs or improved jobs. In Rob Summers' case.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not. I get frustration from fans, but yeah, having for Rob Summers at least have a guy getting a head coaching job is a great sign for Missouri's program. Speaking about the staff, there was a job posting for that Mizzou Athletics made a little while back for a men's basketball general manager, and it's interesting. It's definitely not a surprising move. Not anything particular with Missouri, but just with college athletics, and it's becoming a growing position. And I'm going to throw in the clip of Dennis Gates talking about why he wants to hire a general manager, and then I'll have some thoughts on it.
The GM hat there.
Yeah.
Looks like you are in the process of looking for a GM right now. What made that the right time to seek out a GM?
I thought about it after my first year, and I just wanted to keep that role as my responsibility because I knew what I needed to take place. I needed to leverage some of my personal relationships, but also now you can add the dimension of the changing times around us. I thought it's the right time, or think it's the right time now to do it. But ultimately, what do I think it'll allow me to take place in? It'll allow me to continue to do other things without dividing time. Agent relationships is a real thing. It's very important throughout the season. It's very important in the off season, and it frees any staff up and allows guys to really focus on the players in your program. And not saying that I've divided my time, but the reality is the portal opens while the season is still remaining.
So one of the real interesting things about general managers and how they fit into college athletics, that we haven't seen how it really plays out yet, that a lot of people have mentioned, is just what does the power structure turn into? Because you hear Dennis talking about it a little bit in that clip of the reason he wanted to, well, he said he considered it in his first year with the program, but the reason he didn't want to was so that he could, not that he's a control freak, but so that he could have control. He knew his vision, and he wanted to carry that out with his staff, with his roster, the way he wanted to build things. And so to me, that implies if he didn't want to hire one after his first year because of those reasons, then there's implication that at least some of those you have to share with the general manager if you hire one. And so obviously, like in the NFL, the head coach just worries about coaching. General manager worries about the roster. And so I think it's interesting because I think there is a lot of coaches that want to just be a coach, but also roster building has always been a part of being a college coach, recruiting and all of that. And I'm sure it kind of varies from team to team how they want to do that. There's like the whole like social hierarchy to it too as well. Like and the just the diversion of responsibilities is interesting. And then also how do they collaborate with the athletics director and all of that budgeting. So I'd be interested, and I hope we get to talk to Dennis Gates and Laird Veach again soon. And if not, we'll just have to wait until, I'm sure if they hire one soon, we'll get to talk to them then. But that's it. It's certainly an interesting position to want to fill. Any thoughts there, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered, and I agree with everything you said. One thing I've always wondered is like, obviously NIL and, dealing with the transfer portal and recruiting and dishing out money to players was never on the job application for becoming the head coach of any college athletic sport, right? That was never, never on the job. And there's always been rumors of like of teams paying players even before all of this was legal or illegal or whatever we want to call it. But I was just curious, like, at what point do these coaches get tired of it? And I think that's kind of a reason we're seeing this general manager role pop up, because it makes you wonder if some of these coaches were just like too far in over their head. Like, I didn't sign up for this, right? That was kind of my big thing. I mean, recruiting is one thing, and I'm sure at first, the payment of players in the transfer portal and high school recruits was probably pretty minimal, right? Or I guess kept quiet, but somewhat minimal, right? And then it gets publicized, and there's rules, and all of a sudden players are commanding $2 to $3 million, even more. And coaches probably don't want to be accountants; they want to recruit and coach their teams. So I've always wondered, when do they get tired of the NIL stuff? And not that I'm sure there's ways they could still be involved with that, or maybe they are still involved with it in some way, but having someone else to do that job, I'm sure, would be a blessing. Because again, I would imagine, most of these guys just want to coach and recruit and build relationships with players. So I guess the general role manager appearing across the country with different teams, all across sports, is kind of a sign that, these coaches don't really want to deal with that or handle it anymore.
Right. Another factor to it as well with recruiting is, again, in the pros, such a big part of being a general manager is scouting talent. And at least for now, it's always been the coaches do that and the coaching staff does that. So then, I mean, assistant coaches at every sport are so important for scouting. And so, I mean, at the end of the day with that, though, it can't hurt to have somebody who doesn't have to worry about actually coaching, and is just focused on that. Again, it can't hurt to have another face in there. But again, just an interesting power dynamic that we'll have to see how it ends up playing out. Because again, I think it might be different at every university. There's no traditional way to really do it.
Can I ask you an out of left field question, Joey?
Yes.
A lot of these teams and programs that are hiring general managers are hiring graduates, whether it's a former player, or someone associated with the university. So my question for you is, if there's someone who has a Mizzou connection that would be hired to be the next general manager of this basketball team, who do you think it would be?
That's
Putting
rough.
you on the spot. I know.
A lot of them have been NBA players, like Trae Young
Yes.
for Oklahoma.
Yeah.
The thing with Mizzou is, like, there's not a lot of, one, there's not a lot of NBA alumni, period, active
Yeah.
players at least. And then the ones that are in there, even with like Michael Porter, aren't necessarily active with
Yeah.
the Mizzou community and all of that. I know Chase Daniel offered to be the one for the football team, but they haven't opened. Eli Drinkwood said that they're not looking to do that right now. Man, I don't have a good answer to that. What do you have any that come to mind?
No, and this isn't like a player, but I know like Oklahoma football hired Jim Nagy.
Correct. Yeah.
He was the Senior Bowl guy, correct? So
Yep.
I wonder if it could be someone. I don't know if that person exists, but someone who has a more administrative role somewhere. And there are also older guys that aren't playing in the NBA anymore. Like, would oh my goodness, Damari Carroll, is that his name? Yeah, Damari Carroll.
Yeah.
Or like, would he want to do something like that? Or like a Phil Pressey, or someone who's older who has the professional experience and the connections, like someone like that. I mean, this is just stupid speculation, but I don't know if there's anybody that comes to your mind. I mean, obviously there's kind of a younger wave of guys that are like, you have like Demoy Hodge and guys like that, but they're not going to want to come back and do that. So just floating that idea out there. I don't have any brilliant ideas, but I'm sure there's some. I mean, I would imagine it's someone with a connection to the university, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Right. And that's a good point too, even of who's being hired for these jobs, and that kind of tells you like what their role is, because Trey Young is having a is in the middle of his career in the NBA, which is not doesn't leave you with a bunch of free time. And so I've like in my imagination, like my idea of what a general manager would be, and what it sounds like Dennis Gates is wanting to hire is somebody that works day to day on this. If you're hiring Trey Young to do it, it sounds a lot more like somebody that can offer you scouting tips. And same thing with Oklahoma with Jim Nagy. I believe he's still doing the senior bowl, which I mean takes up a lot of his time when the winter transfer portal is opening in college football. So again, like, do you just want an extra scout, or do you want somebody that has more of a financial background that can help you with that, or is that left to Laird Veach and the rest of the athletics department? So there's a lot to question with this, but I'm interested to see how it goes. I mean, it's just the next question in this. It almost gets tiring to a point where I feel like everything I'm writing about, everything I talk about, there's mention of NIL and the transfer portal and how it's all changing, but there is so many fascinating avenues with it. It is changing everything with it. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely does. Um, uh, there's so many issues with it, but it is also just an interesting point of change for college athletics, and the House settlement coming up obviously is going to add in a whole other set of dominoes. To wrap it up, let's talk about what we hinted at the start of the returning production on this team. Missouri has the second most returning minutes in the SEC, as you wrote earlier this week, Michael. Just kind of what are your thoughts on that? Because again, like I said, I feel like so many people are disappointed with this transfer portal class, but at the end of the day, like you said, the plan for this team revolves a lot around returning production and development.
Yeah, and this is one that I'm gonna throw my hands up and take a little bit of responsibility, because I had to adjust the tone of how I approach Missouri's transfer portal process, I guess. I was surprised um that they were going after more high profile names and landing more high profile names, because it's just what they've done since Dennis Gates has been the head coach. So definitely was a fair assumption to make that, they were going to go after big names to fill up over half of their production. I mean, you're losing guys like Tamar Bates, Caleb Grill. Those are multi-year players in the program that definitely left an impact. And then Marquez Warwick, Tony Perkins, there for 1 year, but again, incredibly impactful players. So I guess it makes sense that they would have wanted to go get big names to replace those guys, but at the same time, there's so much potential in the guys who did not get to see the court as much, with T.O. Barrett, Honor Boateng, and Trent Burns, that I'm almost like happy and pleased that they are deciding to, put trust in these guys and let them develop. And then we're going to learn a lot about Dennis Gates and his coaching staff this year, and when it comes to player development, because these guys are going to have expanded roles, or a role if you're Trent Burns, obviously. But we're going to have one season of tape for Honor Boateng and T.O. Barrett, and we're going to pick up on it pretty quick if they've improved. And the same thing goes with Ant Robinson and Mark Mitchell. They both took jumps from the season before to this last season, right? Especially Ant Robinson. He was very, very good. So we're going to see pretty quickly again, like, if they've taken those jumps. There's going to be high expectations for those two specifically. They're going to be asked to be all SEC players. And, if that's not the case and they don't make this big, magnificent jump, then maybe we'll look back to this offseason and say, well, we should have gone after this guy, or, why didn't they target this big, high profile name, or, put more effort into getting this guy. So it'll be really interesting. Everyone who's returning is going to be asked to do more, though. Like, Jacob Cruz is going to have to do more. Trent Pierce is going to have to do more. They're going to have to improve on the skills that I guess were under the spotlight last season. Like, for Cruz and Pierce, it's going to be, can they be more efficient shooters? but it's also going to turn into, can they improve defensively, or can they become better passers? So they're going to have to not only improve what they're already good at, but add some more skill sets because they've been around longer. So I think that's going to be important. And then you have all these guys coming back, and how do you mesh in these transfers, and the freshmen. I'll be curious to see if Aaron Rowe or Nicholas Randall get any run. I mean, I would imagine they would get a minimal amount. Dennis Gates likes to play everyone on his roster, so I'd be surprised if they didn't. But it's really going to be interesting. I respect the level of trust that he is putting into these guys. It's unusual now. I'm not trying to say it's a foreign concept, right? Teams in both college football and basketball are doing this, and are they have the ability to bring their players back. And you also have to think about it, if we're looking at it through an NIL sense. I mean, they probably opted, and I don't want to speculate too much, but it's possible that they opted to pay the players they had now more money than go after guys in the transfer portal that would have been more expensive. So that's something else to consider. But I respect the amount of trust he's put into these guys. It's not a completely foreign concept, and there are teams who who are doing this year. And I guess we'll just see if it's the right decision here in the end. And I'm genuinely very curious to see how it goes.
I think this offseason plan is just Dennis Gates betting on not only the players returning, but also his coaching staff and their ability to develop. And I think, well, I don't think this is an exact translation, but they bet on themselves in a sense. And the 2023 seasons, they bet on the returning players, and kind of what you were saying of everybody who's returning is going to have to do more with the returning or with the players they're losing. And that is kind of what happened in 2023. And I mean, but I think ultimately a lot of those players have higher ceilings than Sean East, Nick Carter, and or Noah Carter and Nick Connor. So yeah, again, for both these teams, unsure what their ceilings look like, and it's going to make for a really exciting start of the season. And then we'll go from there. It might not be a very exciting second half of the season, depending on how things shake out, but at the very least, a lot of anticipation.
Before you wrap this up, Joey, I'm going to throw one more thing out there. I just opened Twitter to see that the Chicago Bears are giving Luther Burden the number 87 jersey. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So Bronco Nagorski had the number 3, was retired.
Correct.
So I am very much for preserving this history. I saw somebody say that it was so long ago, who cares? Well, at what point? That's just such a moving of the goalposts for everything. And I think it's cool that Luther Burden wears number 3 because he's Luther Burden III. Somebody asked him something like if he wears the number 3 for some other reason. I can't remember what. It's like, no, it's in my name, which was fun. So, but we'll see. Also maybe there's somebody that has a second number he likes right now, because that's what happened with Matthew Golden with the Packers. He originally wore 81 just because shoot, my number 2 isn't available because Malik Willis has it. But then eventually it's 22 is available. I'll settle for that right now. So we'll see.
Yeah, the first tweet I read made it very clear that those are subject to change. I just had a feeling, I knew you wouldn't care, but I know there's going to be some Missouri fans out there who are very much not happy with that.
Well, that's a good way to round out this episode of the All Things Mizzou podcast. We appreciate you tuning in. We'd appreciate it also if you checked out all the rest of our coverage over at Missouri Tigers on SI. Even though it's the off season, we have a ton of exciting content coming your way. So appreciate you listening. Have a great rest of your day.